Well, good morning again, America. This is Stuart Ryan with the Ryan Report. And today's discussion, as the title might indicate, our treasonous Supreme Court. And today's podcast is dedicated to the subject of treason and what it means. As I have been wondering about what I should next approach as an exigent matter in an American world landscape turned upside down, I came across an interview on Legal AF by Lisa Graves, who is the executive director of True North Research and the president of the board of the Center for Media and Democracy. This interview was with the Venerable Judge Michael J. Luttig, one of our most authoritative scholars on constitutional law and a former Court of Appeals judge who has been a beacon of light in condemning the horrendous decisions of a court, the Supreme Court, that has unleashed the worst nightmare that our founders might have had about the possibility of a return to one-man rule and with it a gruesome tyranny. The bottom line of that interview was that from Judge Luttig's perspective, the Supreme Court, following a long line of cases enabling Donald Trump at the expense of destroying the foundational principles and laws of the United States Constitution that they are sworn to uphold, and whose callous perfidy has taken us to a very dark place from which we might not ever return. Let's watch some of the interview.
And this is the single most important question and issue in America today, Lisa, and that is Donald Trump conducting himself as president in a way that resembles, if not exceeds, the way that King George III was ruling the American colonists back in 1776, at the time that they declared their independence from King George III and the British Crown. And in separate writings, beginning with one in the Atlantic, actually earlier in the year, in May, I believe, I began to sketch out what has now become a full-blown writing of mine on Substack, that America has more and more serious grievances against Donald Trump, its king today, than the American colonists had against King George III and wrote about literally in the Declaration of Independence. Now, to your specific question about the Thomas Jefferson quote, but the founders, our founders, Lisa, and the framers of our Constitution feared more than anything else this man who occupies the White House today and these times during which he is the President of the United States. As I said in the passage that you quoted in the Atlantic, literally, Lisa, our founders of this country believe that if this moment ever came, it would represent the demise of the great nation that they had founded. Yeah. They believed that, Lisa, 250 years ago. And of course, we have come to that moment in our history. You know, I wish we had 2 hours, Lisa, to talk about just the 14th Amendment, Section 3 case and the Trump versus United States, the immunity case. But let's start with the overarching fact and consideration which you referenced, namely that the idea that there would be a king in the new United States of America was not just anathema. It was the very reason that we sought our independence from the British Crown, fought the Revolutionary War, and established a new government by the people under a rule of law, a democratic republic. Fast forward for 250 years, and I happen to know a great deal about this point that I'm about to make. I know for a fact that prior to the Supreme Court's decision in Trump versus United States, there had not been one single word, not one single sentence by any scholar of the law, but neither by any court of the United States, including the Supreme Court of the United States, Lisa, that even suggested that the president might be immune from prosecution for any crime at all. And of course, the Supreme Court couldn't marshal one word of support from 250 years of history in favor of its opinion. There was not one, and it didn't. It literally made that decision up out of whole cloth, as we say in the law. And that decision made Donald Trump king. You know, the court protested that they were deciding this issue for future generations. First off, we don't want anyone sitting on any federal court in the United States of America who believes they're deciding a single case for the rest of American history. Think of the arrogance of that statement. But nonetheless, they weren't deciding this case for the rest of history. They decided this case for Donald Trump and Donald Trump alone. We know this for several different reasons. First, though, of which is that for 250 years, as you and your listeners know, the Supreme Court decides only a single narrow issue, the issue that is presented by the facts of the case. One, it didn't even decide the issue presented by the facts of the case. And two, and listen very carefully, everyone, this second, they decided every possible issue of presidential authority and held as a matter of constitutional law that a president can never be prosecuted for violating the Constitution and or the laws of the United States. Never before in 250 years of jurisprudential history has the Supreme Court ever done something like that.
Now, it's no secret to those of you who do get to watch my podcasts, God bless you, that I have repeatedly referred to the Supreme Court majority as Nazis, and I've done so from the earliest time forward, where others have been very lax to catch up. I might add. But the term Nazis is too weak, too generic, too simple a term, and brings me no satisfaction, even when I often compare them to the Nuremberg judges, these Supreme Court judges, in the Germany of 1933 when Hitler came to power. But in one very important respect, there is a direct correlational argument that can be made about the two, which I'll get back to later. In a sense, I know precisely what to call them, but I feel personally stymied by and locked away from being able to do so by the traditional restrictions of language that are, as a matter of definition, technically accurate if treated narrowly. So I'll sound you all out on the issue, one amongst many that dog my days and sleepless nights. For me, the word is traitors, treasonous people, those who commit the crime of betraying one's country, not necessarily or especially by physically attempting to kill the sovereign or overthrow the government, but who work to use their exalted positions of power to first emasculate, then eviscerate a democratic republic, and then enable a one-man rule takeover, creating a presidential king who becomes completely above the law in direct violation of an established constitutional order. Strictly speaking, treason is the crime of levying war against one's country or adhering to its enemies, giving them aid and comfort. In the United States, this is a narrowly defined constitutional expression and requires proof through the testimony of two witnesses to the same overt act or a confession in an open court. Historically, the definition was much broader and has been used to suppress dissent. So the term implies an external threat or an attempt to overthrow the government as sufficient to declare the behavior as treasonous and the person or persons as traitors. Therefore, I'm left to either decline using the term while describing the 6 Nazi majority justices of our Supreme Court in their conspiracy to falsely deliberate and make wholly unconstitutional decisions, often made from a shadow docket, without reasoned opinions, briefs, and oral argument that actually denies real due process through proper writs of certiorari. Or I embrace a wider historical view and broader interpretation of treason as not requiring actions in response to external threats and foreign nations or attempts to kill and overthrow our government, and argue that by their extremist right-wing ideological conspiracy in supporting the establishment of an authoritarian rule, they have in reality betrayed not merely their oaths and the Constitution, but have in fact betrayed our country and 250 years of experiment that human beings can live in freedom and peace under the rule of law.
Well, where to begin, right? First off, I'm embarrassed, Lisa, that I had never thought about what you said at the beginning of that question, namely that the Chief Justice of the United States in January swore in a President of the United States who he, the Chief Justice, had given absolute immunity under the Constitution for, and therefore I'm only going to call it the paradox that this president was sworn in and swore to uphold the Constitution of the United States by the present Chief Justice of the United States. Now, the back end of your question goes to what's occurred since January 20th of this year. And that's where my first article came in that was released in May, I believe. And in that article, I surveyed and chronicled and analyzed the 12 or 14 signature initiatives of Donald Trump's first 100 days in office. And as you know, I analyzed them to the extent one can in an article like that. But I concluded that every single one of those initiatives, every single one of them, Lisa, was either unconstitutional or otherwise in violation of the laws of the United States. And Donald Trump knew that. Every action he took, he knew was unlawful. And he did it anyway. First, your listeners and viewers should just pause over that. Never before in American history, to my knowledge, have we ever had a president of the United States who one single time violated the Constitution or a law of the United States knowingly and intentionally. Never once, Lisa. And you know that better than I do. Donald Trump, in his first 100 days in office in his second term, did that over and over and over, knowingly and intentionally. So is there any silver lining out of that? Yes. The lower federal courts have invalidated every single action that this president has taken since he took office of any consequence at all. And they have honored their oath to the letter. The courts and even the individual judges have honored their oath to the Constitution. The lower federal courts. That brings us to another of your embedded questions, which is the Supreme Court of the United States. Now, what your listeners need to understand about the Supreme Court of the United States, and I'll give you the top line first, and then I'll explain it. When the Supreme Court of the United States acts in the way that it has done for the past 10 months with respect to claims by Donald Trump, it is acting illegitimately. Now, let me explain. As you know, Lisa, this is a reference to the so-called shadow docket. The shadow docket, for as many years as I've been alive, was just simply known as the emergency docket for true emergencies. Most often, it was capital cases that arose in the middle of the night. Those cases were decided, and again, listen to this and think about it. Even those cases were decided by reasoned opinions of law in the middle of the night in the course of 12 hours or fewer, all right? Now, fast forward to today. In the past 10 months, the Supreme Court has taken onto its emergency docket scores of emergency appeals by Donald Trump. from adverse decisions in the lower courts, adverse to the President of the United States. The President then goes to the Supreme Court and says, this is an emergency. There's never been one single emergency, Lisa. Not one, not even arguably. What has the Supreme Court done? Accepted those cases as an emergency matter, taken them into what we call the bosom of the court for decision for only a matter of days. No arguments, no briefings, no nothing. And then it comes forward not with a full written, considered opinion of reasoning and analysis and explanation of its constitutional decision, but rather essentially one word that says the lower court decision is stayed. Not one single word. When the only power of the court, of course, is neither, the sword of the purse, in reference to the president and the Congress, but rather the power of its reasoned opinions of law. It's the power to persuade the American people that they are in fact interpreting the Constitution of the United States of America, which is their obligation. That's why I said at the outset, when the Supreme Court is deciding any case, but when it's deciding case after case after case of the most important cases possible under our Constitution, not by opinion, not by one single word of explanation or reasoning, but simply staying the lower court's decisions, it's acting illegitimately. Now, what I went on to say in the Atlantic article, which is, I guess, at this point, the most important point and the only point, if the Supreme Court ever decides these cases, the damage to the Constitution and to the nation will have long been done, and it will have been irreparable damage. So take today where we are. The Supreme Court is just now today hearing the tariff case. Well, it won't decide that case until next summer. 2 years into Donald Trump's 4-year term. It doesn't matter what they say 6 or 8, 9 months from now, Lisa. It doesn't matter. The damage has been done.
Do I have a broader thought? Yes, I do. And that is that we have in the past punished judges who participated in the creation of an authoritarian rule and state that committed legalized crimes that overturned the constitutional laws and principles of the Weimar Republic. Yes, indeed, judges were tried at Nuremberg in a subsequent trial known as the Judges' Trial or Jurists' Trial. It was one of the 12 subsequent Nuremberg trials conducted by the United States after the main international military tribunal, and it focused on Nazi officials from the Ministry of Justice and the People's and Special Court. This trial was unusual because it specifically targeted individuals for crimes committed while acting in their capacity as jurists, demonstrating that, quote unquote, doing one's job under a corrupt regime was not a valid defense against atrocity. and in our case, engineering the very decisions establishing a one-man rule and tyranny. I believe if we ever survive this Nazi takeover of our government, each of these 6 corrupt Nazi justices, and I'll name them and shame them, Kavanaugh, Coney Barrett, Roberts, Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas, should be charged with treason. Or, in the alternative, if it is more feasible, conspiracy and or crimes against the United States, prosecuted and if found guilty, sent to prison just as had the Nuremberg judges. However, the problem is, as expressed by Judge Luttig, that it has gone too far now for a simple reversal of the creation of authoritarian rule, the one thing so feared by the framers of our Constitution. Watch Judge Luttig.
Back to your question, there's no question at all, and no one is questioning it. Our institutions of law and democracy have failed us. At the first moment in American history when they could not fail, that was not an option. They failed. They have failed America. With them has failed the other checks and balances that were built into our system of government by the Constitution. In particular, the several states, the 50 states, the free press in particular, but then not built into our Constitution, the other institutions of power and influence, like our companies, our businesses, and our law firms. They have all failed. They have failed America. They have failed us, we, the people. That's why I've been left to say for the past 10 months that there is nothing left. The only people who can save America's democracy and rule of law now are the people of the United States of America. There is no one else. 9 months ago, I was saying that the only organization, the only entity, the only check that could save us was the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's not going to save us. They've told us that. We know it. They don't believe that we need saving, Lisa. The Supreme Court, the one thing we know, they don't believe that the country needs saving, that its democracy needs saving, that its rule of law needs saving, which is just to say there's no one left but us. That brings me to your final question to end our segment here. Every day of the week, everywhere I go, people come up to me, mostly, Lisa, in tears. And they hug me, and they don't let go. And they ask me, are we going to be okay? Is America going to be okay? And for 2 years now, it's the most troubling thing in my life. And I've tried to come up with an answer. And the best answer that I can give today, and that I've been giving for months and months now, is really no answer at all. But it is this. Today, I don't see hope. But tomorrow is a new day.
Finally, I'll say this. From the very second that these corrupted 6 Nazi majority judges decided in Trump versus the United States to hand Trump total freedom from prosecution, granting him presidential immunity for any crimes that he might have and already has committed in office, knowing exactly what they were doing, setting him above the law as a king and free to enslave our people, and are in fact now guilty of crimes against the state and its noble Constitution. So beware, and thank you for watching. Please subscribe, and I thank you.